Stepping away from his 4 NBA titles and huge wealth, at 11:05 p.m., Shaq just wanted a quiet meal at an old Georgia diner. But the real world is not always that peaceful. At the register, a young black girl was crying because she was $3 short of buying hot soup for her sick mom. The strict manager refused to help her because of end-of-day sales rules. This cold act pushed Shaq to make a quick choice, turning his simple dinner into a mission to stand up for those in need. Faced with this cold world, what will the giant do to change this little girl's life? A few minutes earlier, Kiera had stood at the register counting out coins one by one. Her small fingers shook a little from the cold outside. She placed each coin down carefully on the counter, lining them up in a neat little row. The cashier behind the counter, an older woman, watched with a tired, tight face. "That's only $1.15, sweetheart," the cashier said, not unkindly, but firmly. "The soup costs $4.15. Kiera's eyes filled. With tears, she tried hard to blink away. "Please," she whispered. "My mom is sick. She needs something warm tonight. I can owe you the rest, I promise." That was when Donald walked over from the back office, his name tag crooked on his shirt. He looked at the coins, then at the clock on the wall reading past 11. "I'm sorry, but we close out the register at 11 sharp," he said, his voice flat and final. "Rules are rules. I can't make exceptions, not even tonight." Kiera's shoulders dropped. She swept the coins back into her small fist and turned away from the counter. Tears fell freely down her cold cheeks. The sound of Donald's sharp voice faded slowly into the cold diner air. In the corner booth, the giant man shifted his weight just a little. He bent his knees hard and dropped his shoulders low. He did this every single time he sat in a small booth like this one. He did not want his head to bump the hanging lamp above him. The old bulb buzzed softly, casting a weak yellow light across the table. His burger sat on a chipped white plate in front of him. It cost $4.25. He had only eaten half of it. The bread had gone a little cold by now. His eyes moved down first to his own shoes under the table. They were size 23, worn at the edges, plain and simple. Then his eyes lifted and crossed the room. He looked at a little girl's shoes near the counter. They were old cloth sneakers, torn at the side. Gray tape wrapped around them, so rain would not soak through. He had a flight back to Los Angeles waiting for him at 6 in the morning. A $12 million business deal sat on the other end of that flight. His knees ached deep down, the old pain from years on the basketball court. He felt tired all the way to his bones tonight. He had flown in late, eaten a quiet dinner, and planned to disappear into a quiet hotel room before sunrise. A small thought crossed his mind for just a second. He could hand the girl a $100 bill right now and walk straight out the door. That would be the easy way, but something quiet inside him said this went much deeper than money ever could. He sat still in the booth and watched. The diner around him stayed mostly empty at this late hour. An old radio behind the counter played a soft country song, almost too quiet to hear. A ceiling fan turned slowly above the booths, pushing warm, grease-smelling air across the room. He could hear the low hum of the soda machine against the wall. Somewhere nearby, a fork clinked softly against a plate. None of it really mattered to him right now. His full attention stayed locked on the small girl standing near the register, her shoulders pulled in tight against the cold. Would the giant just throw out a few dollars and leave without looking back? Or would he choose to step into this little girl's world tonight? The girl's name was Kiera. She was 9 years old, with sharp eyes and thin cheeks, from going hungry too often. She slowly put $1.15 back into her jacket pocket. Her jacket was old denim, ripped open at the elbow. She had walked nearly a mile already, that night, just to reach this diner before it closed. She turned away from the bright counter lights and walked toward the glass front door, her head down low. The clock on the diner wall read 12 minutes past 11. Outside, the night air sat at 5 degrees Celsius. A cold wind blew in from the marshes outside town. It cut through old coats like a sharp blade, the kind of wind that found every gap in worn fabric. The giant rose up slowly from his booth. His body stood 2 meters and 16 centimeters tall. The wooden table shook a little under the shift of his weight. He said nothing at all to Donald behind the counter. He placed a $50 bill flat on the table, even though his small meal had only cost $4.25. Then he turned and walked out, without one single word. A small bell over the door rang once behind him, sharp in the quiet night. He followed Kiera from a safe distance, staying about 15 meters back the whole time. He walked slowly on purpose. He bent his head low under the old oak trees lining the road. He did not want his huge shadow to fall across her and frighten a child walking alone at night down 9th Avenue. Where was this little girl heading in the cold, dark night, with an empty stomach and tired, aching feet? He passed an old payphone booth, its glass cracked, and its receiver hanging loose. His own phone buzzed once in his coat pocket. It was a call from his business partner back in LA, a quick reminder about the early morning meeting. He glanced down at the bright screen for a second. Then his eyes lifted again, drawn to the small, shivering shadow of Kiera walking just ahead of him. The pain in his knee grew sharper with every step on the cracked, uneven sidewalk. He thought briefly about his soft hotel bed waiting at the Westin, just 3 miles from here. That room cost $650 a night. It would be warm there tonight. It would be quiet, with no wind and no worry. If he stopped walking right now, he would just be another man passing through a small Georgia town. But something else pulled at him, stronger than any tired bone in his body. He thought of Newark. He thought of being a hungry boy himself, many years ago, in a cold apartment that never felt warm enough. He remembered the smell of the radiator that barely worked and the sound of his mother humming softly while she stretched one meal into 2. His own mother once skipped her meals so he could eat a simple hot dog after school. Watching Kiera's tired little walk brought all of that rushing back at once. He slid his phone back into his pocket and kept walking. What would happen if the giant finally walked up to this little girl right now, in the dark? Near the corner by an old laundry shop, he saw a man sweeping dry leaves into a metal trash can. The man's name was Silas. He looked about 65 years old, with gray hair under a worn wool cap. Silas glanced up from his broom. His eyes went wide with shock. He froze completely still for 3 long seconds, staring hard at the familiar face hidden under a dark hoodie. Silas did not shout or make a scene. He simply bowed his head with quiet respect. His voice came out low, almost a whisper, full of something like reverence. "Hello, champ," Silas said softly. "You're following Ruth's girl, aren't you?" Silas shared something important next, leaning in close. "That child has Newark in her eyes," he said. "She would rather go hungry than ever beg for a dime. Her mother, Ruth, is sick with pneumonia right now. They're staying in room 114, down at the Pinecrest Motel on this same road. They're about to get thrown right out, onto the street." Silas had worked this same corner for almost 20 years, sweeping leaves and trash long before the sun came up. He knew every porch light on this street, and every family struggling behind closed doors. He had heard whispers about Ruth's cough getting worse each week. He had watched Kiera walk to school alone too many cold mornings in a row. He never said much to anyone about what he noticed, but he noticed almost everything. The words Newark in her eyes landed hard, hitting something deep and old inside his chest. In that moment, he knew there was no turning back now. The flight, the deal, the warm hotel bed, none of it mattered anymore tonight. How could a giant approach a proud little girl without bruising her quiet sense of dignity? He moved ahead, with long, careful steps, each one surprisingly gentle for a man his size. Under a yellow street light at the corner, he let a $20 bill slip from his fingers near her worn, taped sneakers. Then he lowered himself down, onto the cold curb, folding his huge frame small. He wanted to look her right in the eyes, not down at her, from far above. His voice came out soft and warm, like a slow evening breeze through summer leaves. "Hey kid, you dropped this." Kiera stopped walking at once. She looked down at the money, then up at the huge man sitting on the curb. Her eyes held no greed at all, only sharp, careful caution. "That's not mine," she said firmly. "I only have $1.15. My mom says never take money you didn't earn yourself." He smiled then, a warm smile that seemed to push back the cold night air around them both. In her stubborn little face, he saw the same fierce pride he once carried himself at 10 years old, back in Newark. He remembered standing in a school lunch line, with empty pockets, refusing to let anyone see how hungry he really was. That memory had never fully faded, even after years of fame and fortune. It simply waited quietly inside him, ready to surface on a night exactly like this one. What could he say next to win over a proud little girl who refused easy charity? He thought fast and offered her something fair instead, something that felt like a real trade. "My back is hurting bad tonight," he said, rubbing his shoulder for effect. "I can't carry this milk all the way to the Pinecrest Motel up ahead. If you walk with me and carry this small bag, I'll pay you $50 for the job. Deal?" Kiera crossed her arms and tilted her head, studying him carefully for a long moment, the way a grown woman might size up a stranger. She had learned not to trust easily, not after everything her family had been through this past year. But something about his quiet voice and tired eyes felt different from the usual strangers she crossed paths with at night. She studied the small carton of milk in his hand, then slowly nodded her head. They began walking together down the dark, empty street, side by side under the cold stars. "Why do you walk so slow?" Kiera asked, after a while, glancing up at him sideways. "Bad knees," he said simply. "Old injury. Doesn't like the cold much." "My mom's knees hurt too," Kiera said quietly, "from standing all night at work." He nodded but said nothing more. He let the silence sit between them for a moment, comfortable and easy. Their footsteps fell into a slow, matching rhythm on the empty sidewalk. Then trouble rolled up fast. A police patrol car pulled sharply over to the curb beside them. An officer stepped out, one hand resting near his belt, his eyes full of sudden doubt. He stared hard at the huge man walking beside a small child this late at night. The giant did not get angry or raise his voice. He did not lean on his famous name like a shield. He simply stood very still and lifted both massive hands in a slow, peaceful gesture. "Evening, officer," he said calmly. "We're just walking down to the motel. This young lady is helping me carry something." The officer studied Kiera's face for a long moment, checking for fear or distress. Kiera stood tall and met his eyes without flinching. He spoke calmly and reached for his wallet to show his driver's license. The moment the officer read the name Shaquille O'Neal printed on the card, his face went pale white. He stammered out a quick apology and backed away into the night, his radio crackling behind him. What would they find waiting for them once they finally reached the motel? They arrived at the Pinecrest Motel a few minutes later. It was a rundown, two-story building, with yellow paint peeling off in long curling strips. A wet, sour smell of mold and dirty drain water drifted up from an open ditch nearby. A single porch light flickered weakly above the office door, buzzing every few seconds like it might die out completely. Old plastic chairs sat broken and stacked in a corner of the lot, soaked from the night's rain. Outside room 114, something cruel was already happening. Vance, the heavy motel owner, stood blocking the doorway, his cigar smoke curling up into the cold night air. He threw an old cloth bag hard onto the wet, rain-soaked ground below. A second bag followed it, landing with a wet thud in the mud. Inside the room, Ruth, Kiera's mother, gripped the cold metal window frame just to stay standing. Her face had gone pale and thin. A dry, painful cough tore through the quiet night air around them. Vance shouted loudly, his voice harsh and final. "It's past midnight. No $180 for 4 days of rent means you're out on the street tonight. I'm not running a charity here." How would the giant's quiet power finally show itself against such open cruelty? Vance reached out fast to grab Ruth's thin arm and pull her outside into the cold. In an instant, a huge dark shadow fell over Vance and the entire motel porch. The giant stepped forward without a sound. A heavy, total silence settled over the scene. He did not yell or raise a single fist. He simply stood there, 2 full heads taller than Vance, staring down with the cold, steady focus of a lion watching its prey. Vance froze on the spot. The cheap cigar slipped from his lips and dropped into a puddle below. He leaned down slightly, and his voice came out low and warm, yet somehow carrying the weight of 1,000 pounds behind it. "How much?" Vance shook a little, trying hard to hold onto some last shred of toughness as he pulled out a crumpled payment notice. Base rent is $180, plus a late fee of $50. Total comes to $230. The giant pulled out his wallet calmly. He counted out exactly 3 crisp $100 bills and pressed them flat into Vance's fat, sweaty palm. They're staying here tonight. Now get out of my sight. Vance grabbed the money fast. He did not dare say another single word. He backed away quickly and disappeared into the dark, his footsteps fading down the road. Kiera stood close by the doorway, watching everything in complete silence. She had never seen an adult speak so few words and still win so completely. She tucked that lesson away quietly, somewhere deep in her mind, without fully understanding it yet. The cold wind still moved through the broken porch railing, but she barely felt it now, standing this close to her mother again. Could $300 really fix the deep, buried roots of this family's quiet pain? Ruth was carefully helped back inside the small, narrow room. The space measured barely 15 square meters, holding only a rusty spring bed and a broken old electric heater that no longer worked. The air inside felt almost as cold as the night outside the thin walls. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering weakly with each gust of wind outside. Kiera moved quickly and quietly. She poured warm soup into a chipped bowl for her mother to eat. He had bought it earlier, almost without thinking, at a small convenience store along their walk. She blew gently on the spoon before each bite, just like her mother used to do for her years ago. Ruth looked up at him with wet, glassy eyes. She tried weakly to stand and thank him properly, but he gently guided her back down onto the bed. He lowered himself onto the only plastic chair left in the room. It creaked loudly and bent slightly under his enormous weight. He sat and talked quietly with Ruth, learning her sad and difficult story piece by piece. She had once worked as a skilled and respected nursing assistant. After her husband died slowly from cancer, she fell hard into deep debt. She could not find the $1,200 needed to renew her work license in time. Now she worked long nights at a laundry factory for just $8.25 an hour, often until 2 in the morning. "I'm not asking for pity," Ruth said softly, pulling her thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I just need one more chance to stand on my own feet again." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, worn thin from coughing and worry. He listened closely, nodding slow. He understood something important now, sitting in that cold little room. Giving cash alone would only help this family survive one more single week. Giving back her dignity, her job, and her future would help them for the rest of their lives. What big plan was quietly forming inside the giant's mind through the long night? At 1:30 in the morning, he stepped back outside, onto the cold motel porch. He pulled out his phone and called Jerome, his most trusted business assistant back home. His voice came out firm and perfectly clear in the night air. "Jerome, I need you to buy the whole Pinecrest Motel tonight, right now. Also buy out the Peach State Diner on 9th Avenue. Call the franchise owners immediately. Offer them 20% above market price. I want every paper signed and done before 7:30 in the morning." Jerome did not ask why. He had worked for years learning never to ask why, only how fast. Within minutes, he was on 3 different calls at once, waking up lawyers and property owners across 2 time zones. He pulled old contacts from his phone, men who owed him favors from deals years earlier. He kept a small notebook by his desk just for nights like this, full of names he could call at any hour. By 2 in the morning, the diner's owner had already agreed to sell. By 3, the motel's holding company sent over the first signed documents. He did not sleep at all that long night. He sat alone in his rental car for hours, watching the dim window of room 114 without blinking. The radio stayed off. The heater in his rental barely worked either, but he did not mind the cold tonight. He thought about his own mother back in Newark, the nights she sat awake just to make sure he stayed warm. He wanted to make absolutely sure the mother and daughter finally got one full, peaceful night of rest. When morning came, what would the cold-hearted people finally face for what they had done? At 8 in the morning, Vance came storming back. He brought 2 local law enforcement officers along with him this time. He wanted to push the family out fast, claiming their lease had already expired overnight. At the very same moment, Donald, the diner manager, got a call from Jerome. He was told to come down to the motel and meet the new owner in person. This was the moment everything finally turned around completely. Vance walked into room 114, with pride still in every step. He had brought the two officers as backup, expecting an easy fight. He did not expect to see anyone else inside the room at all. Before he could even open his mouth to speak, Jerome stepped forward calmly. He held out a thick stack of legal papers, freshly stamped in red ink at 7:15 that very morning. The two officers exchanged a quick, uneasy glance with each other. Jerome announced it clearly and loudly enough for everyone to hear. The Pinecrest Motel now belongs to S.O. Enterprises. Mr. Vance, you are officially fired from your position for violating fair housing rules. You have 2 full hours to collect your things and leave. Vance stood completely frozen on the spot. All the color drained slowly from his wide face. He looked down at the papers, then up at the giant standing quietly near the window. He finally understood exactly who he had been fighting against all along. He opened his mouth once, but no words came out. The officers stepped back toward their car without another word. Donald stood nearby, shaking slightly with fear. He finally understood, all at once, that the giant man in the dark hoodie from last night stood behind everything happening here. Donald lowered his head low, quietly waiting to be fired too, bracing himself for the news. But the giant walked over calmly and placed one huge, gentle hand on Donald's shoulder. I won't fire you, he said quietly. I know you were under heavy pressure from people above you that night. But starting today, you will spend 150 hours serving meals down at a community kitchen. You need to learn how to truly look at a hungry child and really see her. Donald nodded fast, his throat tight. He thought about his own daughter at home, about how he would feel if anyone ever turned her away hungry into the cold. He wiped his eyes quickly with the back of his sleeve, embarrassed by the sudden tears. Donald broke down crying right there, full of both deep gratitude and quiet shame. What final gift was still waiting for little Kiera and her tired mother? He turned at last to face Ruth and Kiera one more time, the morning sun rising gently behind him. He handed Ruth a sealed envelope. Inside sat her full nursing certificate, completely paid off and properly renewed. Tucked beside it was a brand new work contract, the pages still crisp from the printer. She would now become the manager of the freshly renamed community housing center called Newark Hope House. Her new salary would be $4,500 every single month. She would also live completely rent-free in the very best room in the whole building. Ruth pressed a trembling hand against her mouth, reading the numbers twice to be sure they were real. She looked up at him, unable to find any words large enough for what she felt. Outside, the morning light grew brighter through the thin curtains. It painted the small room in a soft golden glow that had never touched these walls before. Kiera appeared a moment later wearing brand new clothes, clean and warm. She carried a bright pink backpack, packed full of fresh school supplies for the coming term. A volunteer from Jerome's team had taken her shopping early that morning while the paperwork was still being signed. She ran straight toward the giant and wrapped both small arms tightly around his leg, her face pressed against his knee. He bent down low, all the way to the ground, folding his huge body small, and pulled her gently into a warm, careful hug. Thank you, Kiera whispered into his shoulder, her voice muffled and small. You don't owe me a thing, he said quietly back. Just keep being brave, kid. There were no cameras anywhere around them. There were no social media posts waiting to be made. The street stayed quiet, the only sound coming from a distant dog barking somewhere down the block. At 5:15 in the morning, he quietly climbed into a black SUV. It headed toward the airport, on time for his 6 o'clock flight home to LA. Before he stepped away completely, he said one last thing, his voice warm, slow, and steady in the cool morning air. A person's worth isn't measured by how tall they stand. It's measured by how low they're willing to bend, just to lift someone else back up. Ruth held that sentence close in her mind for the rest of her life. She would repeat it to Kiera many times in the years ahead, especially on hard days, when nothing seemed to be going right. She wrote it once on a scrap of paper and taped it to the kitchen wall, where it stayed for years afterward. The sun rose slowly and fully over 9th Avenue as the SUV pulled away down the quiet road. Inside Newark Hope House, Ruth stood by the window holding her daughter close against her side. Kiera watched the black car shrink smaller and smaller in the distance. She held her new pink backpack tight against her chest the whole time. For the first time and longer than she could remember, she felt warm all the way through. The warmth ran from her chest down to her tired little feet. Down the street, Silas swept the morning leaves again, just like every other ordinary day. He glanced over toward the motel sign, freshly painted now, with its brand new name shining in the early light. A small, knowing smile crossed his weathered face. He thought back briefly to his own childhood in Newark, decades ago, before he ever moved south. He had seen this kind of quiet power before. It belonged to a different boy, long ago, back home in Newark, with the very same eyes. Inside the Peach State Diner, Donald stood behind the counter. That morning, his hands still trembling slightly. He wiped down the same old tables from the night before, slower than usual this time. He kept thinking about the way the little girl's eyes had looked when he turned her away so coldly. He remembered his own training, the strict rules about closing the register on time no matter what. None of those rules felt important to him anymore. He made a quiet promise to himself, right there alone in the empty diner. He would never look at a hungry child that way again. Across town at the laundry factory, Ruth's old co-workers heard the strange news by early afternoon. They could hardly believe that the quiet woman, who once worked nights for $8 an hour now ran an entire housing center downtown. One older woman, who had worked beside Ruth for 3 years folding sheets, sat down hard on a plastic crate when she heard. A few of them cried soft, happy tears right there on the factory floor, the machines still humming loudly around them. Word of it spread fast, through the whole neighborhood. That day, passed from porch to porch. Good news always finds its way home eventually. By that same afternoon, fresh new heaters had already been installed in every room at Newark Hope House. Workers carried in soft new mattresses and warm blankets for each family staying there that week. The old rusty bed frames were hauled out and replaced one by one, room after room down the hallway. Someone painted the front office a soft blue color, covering up years of peeling yellow paint. A new sign went up by the front gate, simple white letters on a dark wood board. Children who once shivered through long cold nights now had warm, quiet rooms waiting for them after school. None of them ever learned the real name of the man who had made it all happen. They only knew that somehow, almost overnight, everything around them had quietly changed for good. Kiera started at her new school just the following week. She wore her brand new shoes proudly. That first morning, the kind without any tape holding the sides together anymore. The hallway smelled like fresh paint and floor wax, nothing like her old school across town. On her first day, a classmate noticed and asked gently about her old worn-out shoes from before. "Did you get new shoes for the new year?" the classmate asked, curious but kind. Kiera simply smiled and said her mom had gotten a wonderful new job recently. She did not feel the need to explain anything more than that to anyone. She sat down at her new desk by the window and opened her fresh notebook, the pages still crisp and unwritten. Months later, on a quiet evening, Ruth sat outside Newark Hope House watching the warm orange sunset fade slowly behind the trees. The building looked different now, with flower boxes under the windows and fresh paint along the railings. She thought often about the giant, who never once gave his real name, who never asked for a single word of thanks in return. She remembered his calm, steady eyes. She remembered how he always seemed to fold his body smaller, as if trying to take up less space in the world. Kiera sat beside her on the porch step, swinging her feet and humming a song from school. She finally understood what old Silas had once whispered about him, that cold night. Some people carry their quiet power the same way they carry an old, hidden hurt. They keep it deep down inside, shown only to those who truly need it most. Far away in Los Angeles, the giant stepped slowly off another late flight, just another tired traveler lost in a long line of weary strangers. No one in that crowded airport knew anything about what he had done back in Georgia. He did not need any of them to know. He walked toward his car alone under the bright terminal lights, carrying nothing heavy with him except a quiet, steady peace inside his chest. His phone buzzed once, with a message from Jerome confirming all the paperwork had cleared. He read it, smiled briefly, and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Back on 9th Avenue, the diner stayed open every single night. After that, its lights glowing warm and steady against the growing dark outside. Donald kept a small bowl of free soup sitting by the counter now, just in case anyone ever walked in short on cash again. The bowl sat next to the register, simple and plain. A small sign beside it read nothing more than "Ask if you need it." He never explained why to any of his coworkers. He simply did it quietly, every single night, without fail, long after most people had forgotten the cold night it all began. New staff who joined the diner later just assumed it had always been that way, a small house rule nobody questioned anymore. And somewhere out there, in another city, in another quiet diner, a tired giant kept walking softly past strangers who never learned his real name. He kept watching closely for one more child standing nervously at some counter, counting out coins that never quite added up to enough. He kept choosing, again and again, the harder path, the quieter path, the one that asked for absolutely nothing in return. Because real strength was never truly about how loud or how large a man could appear to the world around him. It was about how gently he chose to use the quiet power he carried inside. That mattered most, when no one was watching, when the cold world had already turned its back and walked away.